Estamos de volta aqui no RD Summit Live Show e estou aqui hoje, né, com uma das nossas mais aguardadas keynotes, já no terceiro ano no RD Summit. Aí, mas ela é gringa, né? Então vou conversar com ela em inglês, mas vocês podem acompanhar a legenda embaixo em português, tá bom? Hi, April. Welcome.
So great to be here.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you here.
We're live. It's so exciting.
Is the global expert on positioning.
I love that.
And, really about product positioning and all the work that we do to help define the markets that our products are in and bring them to market themselves. And so thank you so much for being here. We have a couple of great questions. The first of which is a lot of people watching today are entrepreneurs, right? And entrepreneurs are really good at building great products. And then they get to the stage where they really have to put their products out there to the market. And so where do they start and why is it positioning?
Sometimes I think it is positioning, but it doesn't have to be. So I think generally the way we think about a brand new product is entrepreneur wakes up in the morning and they think about a better way to do something that already exists. So they wake up in the morning and they say, you know what's terrible? CRM is terrible. We should have a better CRM or we should have a better email. But then they get it out in the market. Customers like some parts of it. They don't like other parts of it. They change things. And then the product itself starts to change. And if I fast forward a couple of years, the entrepreneur still thinks what they're building is email or a CRM or whatever it is they set out to build. But the market has changed and people that come and look at it for the first time might say, I don't know, you're calling this an email, but it kind of looks like chat. And so I think the first thing that entrepreneurs have to think about is that the context that they can position a product in might change over time. And so just because we set out to build a database or email doesn't mean that that's always what it's going to be. And in the future, we may actually want to position it in a different way.
Yeah. No, that is great advice and actually very much related to the second question I wanted to ask you, which is sometimes, when we're building positioning, there are obvious things about our product or the features of our product or the value of our product that we forget. And so sometimes it is email and we forget to say that it's email. And so what's the value of stating the obvious?
Well, so I think the most common mistake that I see, particularly with entrepreneurs that come from the product side or they're sort of technical, the most common mistake I see is an entrepreneur will build a feature. And to them, the value of that feature is utterly obvious. So they'll say, well, I've got this gripple grommet. And it's so obvious what you would use that for and why it's valuable. But customers don't necessarily make the translation between the feature and the value that that feature enables for them as customers. And so part of the reason why we think like that is that many of the products that we use every day, we've actually been trained why the feature matters. So if you buy a new cell phone, the vendor will tell you how many megapixels are on the camera in the cell phone. That's a feature. But we've been trained to know how to translate more megapixels is better, and it's better because if we zoom in on the picture, it's clearer or whatever. If you build something in your product, maybe nobody knows why it matters. And so I think it's really important for new entrepreneurs in particular to take a step back and say, do people actually understand why this feature matters? And we have to be explicit about it, even though to us it might be utterly obvious why this feature is super important and everybody's going to love it.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's probably a pretty common mistake that people make.
So common.
Yeah. What are one or two other common mistakes that people make while they're building their positioning?
Well, the first one is that they just don't think about positioning at all because they think it's obvious. They're like, well, I'm building a database. What else could it be? It's email. What else could it be? That's the most common mistake. The second most common mistake I think people make with positioning is not really thinking about the competitive alternatives in the way that they could. So often we'll think of our competition as being just other things that look like our product. But in B2B software, for example, most of the time we're competing with things that look nothing like our product. So we're actually competing with Excel, or we're competing with manual labor, or we're competing with just hire an intern to do it. So if we want to do a good job of positioning, we really have to understand what we're positioning against. And that might include status quo things that don't look anything like our product at all.
No, that's great. And so, when we are building out that positioning and avoiding all of those mistakes, there's also value that good positioning can bring back to the product. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like when we're building as a company or as marketing, working with product or in the other areas of the business, and we build out that positioning, what value can that bring back to the product, both in the short but in the long term as well?
Yeah, so I think there's the short-term value that crisp positioning gets is, we'll get a really tight definition of exactly who do we compete with, what are the capabilities we have that are differentiating, and what is the value that those differentiating capabilities can drive for customers. That is often very clarifying. Like when we get really clear on that, it helps the product team determine how should we rank features for what to build next in the roadmap, because we're trying to solidify that positioning. In the longer term, it's interesting. We might actually be building towards a different position. So we might say, well, we're here now, but in the long term, what we want to be is this other thing. And so if we want to be this other thing, we're going to have the features that drive the differentiated value that make us this other thing in order to get there. So I think there's a short-term focus, but there's also long-term value in thinking about how does our positioning evolve over time.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so another question that, I have myself and that a lot of people have asked me is how do we, how do we know when positioning is good, or like what's an example of really good positioning?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the time, like people, what people want? They want a number. So people come to me and they're like, April, what's the metric that we can measure that we know that the positioning is good? And unfortunately, there is no metric. I wish there was. And then I could say, well, this is it. You take 2, divide by 5. Now we know. But there isn't. Bad positioning is bad all the way across your funnel. Good positioning feels like magic. Everything just goes good. Generally, in the companies that I work with, when we develop new positioning and we're trying to test that new positioning, the easiest way to test positioning is to build a sales deck. So we take the positioning, we translate it into a sales story. Then we try out that sales story in front of a qualified prospect. And what we're looking for is, does this work better than the old story? If it does, then we've improved the positioning and we run with it. So it becomes kind of a matter of degrees. Like, is the positioning better than it used to be? Good, we'll run with it. If it's not better, well, then we should roll it back because we've made a mistake somewhere. But I think the best way to test it is live in front of customers. And what we're looking for is, do the customers get what we are? Are the customers getting excited about our value? Are customers comparing us to the right competitors, or are they saying, hey, I think you're like Salesforce and you're nothing like Salesforce? We're looking for signal like that.
Cool. Great. Well, April, it was a giant pleasure interviewing you today. Thank you so much for being here, both in the live show, but here in Florianopolis for the third time. Thank you.
Great.
Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
it's
my
so great to
pleasure.
be back in Florianopolis.
Yeah, thank you.